Hey guys, it's TNFlies. I'm going to show you how to tie this merger zebra midge. So what we got going on, I'm not pro team, I'm not a guide, I'm not anybody that has a bunch of money. I tie with a lot of wholesale fly company materials. So you can't read it because it's reversed, but we're going to be tying this on a size 18 merger. It's their model 13. It's a 2x short. And then we're going to be using their tungsten beads, a 2mm. Now you could use pretty much any good midge hook. I'd recommend a 2mm bead for 18 or 20. Usually we'll tie 20s. Those are more fish during the winter, but this is a great all year pattern, especially for slower waters. I wouldn't fish this in rapid water. I'd always use something with a bigger bead and probably a bigger fly because they'll still eat it. But a lot of our tailwaters in Tennessee here, we got slow moving waters, just 250 cc's or even less. Not a bunch of elevation change in some of these spots, so this is one of my go-tos, especially for the Obi. So we're gonna get started here. We're using Fly Fish Food Antron yarn in white. I'm using Simplify 18-aught classic wax thread. And we're going to start out with putting a little bit of a thread base here, getting our Antron yarn on. I don't count the reps, but that was about 8 reps. It's very, very fine thread. I'm going to go back to keep it in place. Then we're going to come in with our yarn. Don't need a long piece, just whatever you're comfortable with tying on to minimize waste. And I'm not going to split the yarn either. I'm just going to use the whole yarn. Secure that down with a few reps. And I'm going to be pulling this out to save the yarn and also reduce, well, don't want to do that. I'll back that off. You still will make a couple mistakes after tying a good number of these. Okay. Let's get that. And the reason I pull this instead of cutting it is, of course, to save yarn, but also because it's hard to cut. Alright, so that should be good. Get that secured. And then we're whip finishing right behind the eye. Pull that yarn back. And then we're going to come in with a little bit of super glue. Just got a little tube of Gorilla Glue. Take a tiny little dot. Oh. Will get a little messy. Glue is to secure the yarn, but also our bead. You could put the bead on before this, but I just prefer to do it this way. Have a little more space. And we're going to be putting this bead on with the more open side first on the hook, because we're going to be sliding that over this little bulk here. So you're going to have more open-ended side of your slotted, not slotted, but I don't even think there's a name for these beads. I think it's just a standard bead. Bring that in. Might need to push it up a little bit. Probably won't just slide. Okay. We're going to start wrapping. Try to put a little bit of pressure on that bead just to push it up more if there's any space there. You don't want that after you've already wrapped your body. So we're going to go and wrap it back a little bit past the bend. And then we're going to go back. And we're going to have 3 wraps over here just to kind of even out the body, make it look like it's getting slightly larger from the tail to the thorax. A little bitty piece of yarn there. Okay. Need to reposition my hook. So I'm using some pretty cheap wire. This is from Amazon. It's fine wire, they call it. I think it's like 0.1 millimeter or something. It's like one of the tiniest wires you can get for fly tying. And it is the weakest point in this fly, but it just looks so good. And we're going to be putting on resin and glues to make sure that does not break off very easily. Now we're going to go down pretty far. It's going to be a really thin body, so it shouldn't interfere with any hook sets. Size 18 anyways, you're probably going to gently set that hook. It's going to be in there. And probably won't be super deep. But now I'm going to come back in with a little bit of glue. Still got some on my toothpick. This glue is to just harden all of those thread wraps. Super thin thread. So after 6 fish, you don't want this to just break from a tooth. And also I forgot to mention, but you want to keep that wire pretty much on the top of the hook, just so it doesn't curve around and make the body look any type of way. It's not natural. I guess it would look natural if they had a big meal, but I don't think midges eat like that. Got straight. Pull that out. Okay. Now you might have some of that glue harden on the top. You can try to scrape some of it off if you had a little too much there. But when you apply the resin, you should kind of clear that up. So we're going to do a couple wraps at the start, right on each other to reinforce that base. Make sure you don't overlap them. And we're going to start out with a smaller gap, go into a slightly larger gap as we move up the body. Gosh, a lot of annoying pieces of yarn coming out. Okay. Get that up. We're going to secure the wire. Pull on it a little bit, make sure there's no gaps. Spin and pop it off. Okay. Before we go to the next step of applying dubbing on the thorax, we are going to put a coat of Solarez UV resin, bone dry. Now, if you have any excess on there, you want to dab it off. You don't want it to be any thicker of a body than you have from the wire and the thread. Let it soak in a little bit. Now we're going to come in with a dubbing for just a slight amount of dubbing on the thorax. I'm using this hare's ear plus ice dub from some China cheap. Now, I do support local fly shops and all, but I tie so many of these midges, man. I'm just obsessed with it, so I just end up buying some cheaper materials to save myself a little bit of money. I often will use just a black ice dub too, a very small amount of that. That's really nice to do. And what I'm also going to do is put a tiny bit of super glue on the thread here, because now that we've got that UV bone dry on there, it'll be a little slick. And I don't want this dubbing to slide down with the thread, which can easily happen when you have thin thread on top of UV resin. Big thing about these midges is really just reinforcing them. They're so small, and especially when you're getting your forceps out to remove that hook, you will just end up tearing up all your midges. So I feel like that's a pretty important part of these. So we got all of that done. Now we're just going to trim the yarn. I trim it about the length of the bead. You don't need too much. It's a little more than I usually would do, but it's fine. I'd fish it. So yeah, there we go. Emerging zebra. Really good on Tennessee tailwaters where the water's a little bit slower. Or if they're just really eating those midges, I'm sure they'll be eating this one too. It'll stand out really well. That's one of these things. Like when they're emerging, those midges stand out very well. Just a sore thumb in the water. It is pretty heretical to tie a emerger with a bead, but they emerge from the bottom, so they'll eat it. And if they're eating midges, they'll be eating this one. I will often tie a beaded midge and then in tandem tie this onto it, something like this with a foam, no weight. And so you got this floating up 6 inches or so more above your sunken midge. And oftentimes they'll be eating that one that's floating above it. But when they're eating midges that are down lower, which is often the case too, this is a great way to catch those fish. This is TNFlies. Thanks for watching.